actually sitting in my 12th grade U.S. History 2 class. So kind of appropriate for me as a future social studies teacher. And as a number of my students know, I grew up in the Poconos, and we had a very heavy commuter to New York City population. So I had a number of classmates that were very worried for their parents who worked in Manhattan.
I was actually in 5th grade on 9/11. I was attending McDonald Elementary School, and I remember sitting in Mr. Pisacano's class. It was for math, and I remember there was an announcement over the loudspeaker telling the teachers to kind of check their emails, and I remember there was like a lot of whispering going on and conversations, but throughout the rest of the day, nothing was really talked about at school. A lot of kids were pulled out of school that day. I remember there were a lot of phone calls from parents like picking kids up. And one of the big things was that I was supposed to go to my friend's house that day after school, and the school district, I remember they had us go home our normal routes. So like I had to take the bus home to my house, and I was so upset that I had to miss going over to my friend's house. But I remember getting home and like my mom sitting me down and like having a conversation with me about what had happened as best she could to a 5th grader. And I remember a lot of being confused and now being afraid to fly on planes. So there were a lot of conversations that like my mom had to have with me, with my brothers, to kind of try to dispel the fear of flying.
Actually, I was teaching a class that day. We were, it was in the old building, and I remember Mr. Hans was my next door neighbor, and he came over, and when the first plane hit into the building, he came over and he said, "We're getting attacked," and I was like, "Nah, you know, it's just an accident." And then the second one happened, and I just remember classes kind of stopping for the day, and it was the ironic part was I was teaching a history class that second period, and the class was going to start at 9:05, and I remember my lesson plan for that day was, why do civilizations build these great structures like the pyramids and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Twin Towers? And someone was going to have to research, you know, the Twin Towers and why they were made, and we never got to that lesson that day.
So on 9/11, I was working for a window and door company. I was driving a truck, and I was delivering windows to a job site. I was listening to a radio show, and somebody came in and interrupted the host and said a plane hit a building in New York City, and they were in New York filming the show. They kind of brushed it off, and I thought too that it was just some small plane that hit a building, like a propeller plane, and I shut the truck off. Took about 45 minutes to an hour to unload the windows, and when I got back in, I heard the host and I knew what happened, and it was very serious. When I got back to the store that I worked at, they had it on TV, and I could see one of the towers that had the smoke billowing out of it. And while I was watching it with some of the people I worked with, this was on, I think, Good Morning America. We're watching it on live TV, and we see the second plane go through. And as the goosebumps come up on my arms here, we were just struck with terror. That's when you knew it wasn't an accident, when the second one came through. When I talk about it, I go back, I can see it in my mind when this happened. And I still had to do work. I had to go back out and load another truck of windows. I'm listening to the radio, and they said a plane hit the Pentagon in Washington, and there's another plane missing off of radar. They don't know where it is. And I just thought, this is the end of the world. I was 21 years old at the time. I jump off the loading dock, I look in the sky, I just thought that planes were just going to be crashing down on the United States all day, and that we were going to go to war, and this is it. Like I've reached 21, and that's as far as I'm going to go. I thought that was it. But one personal connection I have to that, a lot of my family is from New York, and you know, originally everyone's from there. And my cousin Greg was a firefighter in New York City, and he got to one of the towers. He was one of the last to show up there on the other side of the city. And they didn't get out in time, and he died in Tower 2, I believe. It collapsed while he was inside. and my mom, they were trying to, they knew he was missing for several days. I forget exactly when, but they found some of his remains. The cleanup took months afterwards, and they were able to match him through dental records and recover. So, I mean, we had known at that point that he didn't survive. So he's on if you've ever been to the memorial, his name is on there, Gregory Stajic. It was very devastating to all Americans, but especially to our family, because one of the firefighters that was lost was my cousin. So just it's a day, obviously, I'll never forget. I appreciate that BWTV is doing this. It's tough to relive it, even though it's been 22 years, and it's something that I'll never forget. So it's good to remember it, and thank you for listening.